All right, testing 1 2 3 1 2 3. Okay, so I want to talk about the Ye situation and the complete and utter tragedy that it is. There's lots of words to describe what's going on with him right now, but I think tragic is the word that sums up my feeling most accurately. My experience with Kanye West's art is similar to millions and millions of people, and it's probably very similar to male millennials who kind of came of age in the early 2000s. Hip hop was definitely the defining genre of music of that era. And Kanye was the most innovative and I think vibrant figure in that space while I was growing up. His contributions to music and American culture sonically are so big, so undeniable. Some of his songs just like resonate within your cells forever. It left a permanent mark on myself and many, many others. But on the other side of the coin, there was just always the undeniable shenanigans. And when I first was listening to Kanye West music, I was I think I was probably still in high school. This was like, I was in high school when Stronger came out, and Stronger was such a futuristic, forward-thinking sound, and I just remember sort of my mind being completely blown by it. I also especially remember forming a more positive association with Kanye West because I was at that time still a young Christian. I was raised Catholic and then kind of became Protestant, but was very passionate about my faith when I was younger. And I remember when Jesus Walks came out, it kind of affirmed my faith at the time. And I was suddenly really optimistic about where culture could be heading from the perspective of a passionate believer. And, I think Kanye's always had that appeal. He always can find somebody in the audience who has a unique ideology and connect with them and sort of pull them into his camp. And it's not unlike politics at all. I mean, I think he's always been smart at forming these unique cultural coalitions so that his fan base maybe isn't always the same people, but it's always a large amount of people. And it's always kind of dynamic and changing. As the years went on, it was just obvious to me that Kanye was one of the most important cultural figures of the era that I was living in. And I've always just sort of been fascinated with him. And the idea of Kanye is something I've always grappled with in my mind. What does he mean? Does he represent the genius of creativity or the arrogance and idiocy of the modern world? Jesus came out, and that was maybe the first time, because I think that at that point in his career, that was the most experimental he had gotten. I remember really loving that album. Just the way, the kind of brutal, raw, stripped down, experimental qualities of the sounds in that album from the very opening, that like, wow. Anyway, it's just so dope. On site, yeah. Even at that time, I remember having conversations with my friends, a roommate that I lived with at college at the time, and he was like, but listen to the lyrics, man. Isn't it just like totally bogus and like ego-driven and kind of disgusting? And I remember kind of defending him. I was like, I think that's part of the art. It's bearing all your flaws, being very unfiltered, matching the visceral sound with the sort of like visceral unfiltered examination. And there were definitely songs like Hold My Liquor, where there were these really amazing like sonic bridges that would kind of were very melancholy. And I felt like hidden in all of those sounds and all of those textures and all of this really meticulous, thoughtful production, there was, a deeper meaning and a deeper soul to the work. The soul of Kanye's music was always the sounds and the textures and sort of how they could lift you even despite the toxicity of his words and of his lyrics and the delivery, trolly, not very well put together ideas, and very misogynistic, often perverse and sophomoric humor, a lot of cheap puns. Anyway, it was like the lyrics were always trying to pull down his music, but like even that couldn't stop him. After Jesus, I can't remember what was next. Maybe it was The Life of Paulo, but like that to me, I think was the moment in time where I maybe revered him the most as a creative. And I was willing to look past what were very obvious shortcomings of morality and character. And it just kind of kept growing and growing. And, this was sort of at the time when it was like cool to not like Taylor Swift. And it just really, his music had a way of sort of feeding off of the things that I didn't like. His music was sort of like an armor. Over time, his life has changed. I've grown up. A lot has happened in the world. No matter how bad Kanye seems as a person, I've always been willing to sit down and listen to his music. And as somebody who just really values creativity, that's always felt important to me. It's always felt important to meet the artists where they are at. You're not listening to their work because they're good people. You're listening to their work because they're good artists, and there's truth and meaning and value to extract from the work. And I was willing to do that every time until the experience of the ick was starting to get stronger than the allure and the nourishment I would get from the sounds. And now we're kind of in this like very blackout, the circles of hell era of Kanye. With this progression, he's been shifting from embracing very heavenly ideas and concepts like family and love and being the father of a daughter, to now kind of like some of his most depraved lyrics. Some of the imagery he's been evoking is like truly frightening and violent. And again, I don't think, in defense of art, I think art should be doing that. But as somebody who's been loyally consuming his work, he has been kind of using provocation as the way to get you in, and then using his talent as the way to keep you there for so long. But over time, feels like provocation has gone up and up and up and up, while his talent or the time he's willing to put into creating something that's truly unique and powerful and meaningful, that's starting to go down. And you're starting to see him kind of cannibalize a lot of his own ideas, a lot of his own work, and putting out lesser versions of those same ideas. If we rewind back to Black Skinhead, there was the same exact playing with and flirtation with racial supremacy and hate groups and the contradiction of a white power hate group reskinned with sort of a black powerful figure. And he was playing with that kind of like 3D generated video game type of aesthetic. I mean, all of his ideas were kind of crystallized in that song, just so much more superior to anything he's put out in the last few years. It was just better. The decline of Kanye is, I think, a really big warning sign for the dangers of an unchecked attention economy. Art is valuable, but when art starts to enter the realm of ideas and politics, I think it stops being art as much and it starts being propaganda. And I think it's important to just recognize maybe some of the reasons that Kanye West might have appealed to you when you were younger are not that different than why he appeals to some young people now who are in a darker ideological place. And as somebody who has my own family now, I gotta say, just the idea that he was married and had kids and is now going through such a public crash out is pretty devastating. The behavior and the lyrics that he's been putting out. I mean, can you just imagine the way his kids are going to process that as they grow up? Because they can't be shielded from it. For the first time ever, I'm probably at a point where I just am not going to listen to his music. The discourse I've had with his contributions to culture is kind of reached like an end point. And I think where I kind of feel at peace with it is the creativity has diminished. And that's because, he used to allow himself to collaborate with people. And now, it's just kind of, he's clearly just sort of finding anybody who will like hang out with him to be his crew. But then, there's no Mike Dean synthesizers in this album or in this song. It's the collaboration with other minds. It's the willingness to work with other people that elevates the work. And I think there can always be creative geniuses who like are the heartbeat, but I think great art is usually a synthesis of many people's skills. Brian Eno, he's like, rarely do great ideas come from one person. They usually come from a community. And Kanye's always been good at creating a creative community around him. The quality and health of that community has really gone down. All of this is a very long-winded way of sort of owning that maybe I looked past his flaws in the past in a way that I shouldn't have. And that was part of a large wave of enabling somebody who was always playing with fire and was always saying things that needed to be condemned. There's limits to provocation. It's too opportunistic. I think there's too much going on in the world that he's clearly reading on a very, very surface level, and then seeing that there's a cultural opportunity to benefit off the controversy. And he's steering a lot of people towards very extreme interpretations of global events. When Kanye put out Ye, I think Chris Rock was at like that launch party where they like danced around a campfire. Something he said about Kanye is like, this guy's free. He's all about freedom. But I've been reading this book On Freedom by Timothy Snyder. And when Kanye's in the realm of political ideas, you have to counter him with political thinkers who have their own ideas that are more refined and I think more intricate. And Timothy Snyder's newest book, On Freedom, is all about this idea of negative freedom. Negative freedom is the idea that freedom is just pushing everything out of the way so that nothing can hold you back. You're only truly free when there's nothing, you're bound to nothing. And what he says is that this negative freedom is something that's really predominant in America. And this interpretation of what freedom is can have very negative consequences and lead us to some very bleak societal outcomes. And what he challenges it with is the idea that freedom can be positive. It can not be the absence of something. It can be the presence of something. Kanye might think that he's freeing us by allowing us to say these things because somehow I'm more free if I can listen to a song that says Heil Hitler. Somehow that makes me free, and that makes him free, and that's better for all of us because then we don't live in fear. Just get everything out of the way, get all the fear out of the way, all the rules, all the taboos. But what that is a recipe for is chaos. And I think we all feel the chaos right now. I hit on this in a recent video. The social media right now is it's a way of attaching all of our limbic systems together and then just revving that till we're all redlining and we're all, part of this like insane limbic orgy where we're all feeling outraged and mad and aroused and turned on and freaked out and scared all at the same time. There's a harder form of freedom to cultivate that is positive freedom. And the idea is like building structures and agreements and norms in society, virtuous ways of thinking, value systems, growing those, building them, honoring them, tending to them. Those create platforms that allow us to actually experience freedom. And Timothy Snyder uses this analogy in his book. Transportation is a form of freedom, accessible transportation. When we build a train, suddenly a young person who lives in the suburbs is free to get to the city. Building something that serves the collective and honoring that is a way of unlocking more freedom for the collective. Kanye did try. He tried to, there's lots of moments in interviews where he talks about wanting to help humanity and elevate humanity. And, he started a school that I think was in Calabasas, and it was a total disaster. And it was actually, I think, like ended in what some might call, child abuse, abusive behavior. And, that's where like you have to let other people do their part. When you push in every single direction, and you don't want anybody to hold you accountable, where you ultimately end up is alone. When you find yourself alone in a room with Sneeko, writing songs about how you're a Nazi and how people took away your kids, the truth might be that you put yourself there. And you got to wonder if his psyche could handle that, What an immensely tragic thing to own and to take accountability for. But I see so many people, continuing to make this argument that he doesn't really believe these things. He's just trying to make the argument that, we should all be free and that we're being held back by our fear of these words and our fear of these ideas, and we're programmed into the matrix. I think the thing that's actually happening is we're just so far from those events now that they're abstract. The ruins of the gas chambers and Auschwitz are not enough. They're not real enough anymore to remind us that it actually happened. But it did happen. We did do that. Humans did do that. And playing with any sort of fetishization of the thought leaders and the world leaders that made that a reality is a very, very dangerous thing to do. We're going to see the impact of these ideas, of this fire hose of anti-Semitism and contrarian toxic sludge. We're going to see the consequences of this just being pumped through a megaphone into the world. And I hope that we have enough of an immune system in society to just kind of fight this off. And hopefully this fever that we're going through, this fever that is being of the attention economy, Kanye sort of, being one of the few people who sort of represents the zenith of it. I hope that this fever will eventually break, and that we are going to figure out a way to deliver content to each other and ourselves, and to curate content for ourselves that makes us feel good, that brings out our better natures. Freedom doesn't have to be offending people. Freedom can be being a good dad and taking a step out of the limelight. I think about Andre 3000 a lot. Talk about somebody who was incredibly talented and at one point was at the center of hip hop, but now, the guy put out a flute album. And I think that's really great. Humility would be such a great medicinal thing for Kanye, but it's not going to happen. He is just kind of driving straight off a cliff, and it's only a matter of time until we kind of see the ultimate explosion and tragic ending. And when your greatest work will forever be tarnished by the complete and utter crash out that followed afterwards, it sucks. It's sad. People don't think of Elvis very often without remembering the tragic way that ended. And people aren't going to think of Kanye's music or listen to Stronger without thinking about Nazis and Hitler. And so that just sucks. And he did that to himself.